This is Open Mind Alexander Technique. Today we are having story time. This is my book. I wrote this when I was in my Alexander Technique teacher training course. This was my senior project. So, for the first run through this book, I'm just going to read it as it is. And then I will go through it a second time and explain what is it that we're looking at and why have I made the choices that I did about explaining Alexander Technique teaching to a little kid. Teaching helpful thoughts. What do Alexander Technique teachers do? Lemmertz is my former last name, but I go by Albertine now. Jack loves to play video games and build things, but he does not love sitting to do his homework. When he sits at the table, his back feels stiff and his arms feel funny. His feet can't reach the floor, so he tucks them up underneath his bottom. See how Jack's neck and back are scrunched with big curves. He knows he's only able to sit like this for a few minutes, and homework takes longer than that. He feels frustrated before he even starts. Notice the shape of Jack's back and the look on his face. Jack's stepmom, Vanessa, wants to help. She teaches the Alexander Technique, or AT. AT is a way to learn how to use helpful thoughts that make it easier to do all sorts of things, from playing a sport to holding a pencil, and even just sitting in a chair. Vanessa went to a special school for several years to become an expert on teaching helpful thoughts. She knows how to use both her words and her hands to guide and teach. Vanessa practices teaching a student at school. How are their backs organized differently than Jack's was? Vanessa notices that Jack's face looks frustrated, and his muscles are grabby and tight. First, she puts a low stool in front of his chair and asks him to rest his feet on it as he's sitting. Then she asks him to say, "Not yet," to starting his homework until he's had a chance to think about how he's going to do it. She puts a gentle hand on his back. Vanessa asks him to think about having a floaty balloon head, melty ice cream shoulders, a soft back, and a soft belly. She notices that those thoughts help Jack take a nice, easy breath. His face looks less angry. Try these thoughts on yourself. What changes in your body and brain? When Jack is halfway done with his work, Vanessa asks if he'd like to take a 5-minute break. She asks him to lie down with his back on the floor and uses her hands to guide his muscles to rest more easily. He says it feels really good. Jack notices that his back feels less stiff and his arms feel more relaxed when he writes. It's easier to keep his mind on his work. Pausing for a moment actually makes the homework go faster in the end. What is different about Jack now compared to when he first started? When Jack has finished his homework, Vanessa gives him a high five. "Great job," she tells him. "I love how you used your thinking to make choices that helped you. That is a wonderful way to get things done." Here are some more examples of helpful thoughts. AT teachers have a whole toolbox of these to help each student in their own way. It's great to use these on your own, but working with a teacher has much stronger results. Notice what's happening. Say "not yet" until you've had a chance to think. Organize yourself. Make a new choice. Stick with it and enjoy it. It's okay not to be perfect. ATU teachers work in similar ways all over the world. Both kids and adults can take lessons with a teacher. You can search online for Alexander Technique teachers near me. Many people find AT helpful for chronic pain, fatigue, and improving performance across all disciplines. Changing our habits changes our lives. Here are other people using AT. Notice how they can still be well organized when their bodies are different. This book was created as part of my certification to teach the Alexander Technique. Sue Mary's book, Alexander in Primary Education, which was self-published in 2018, was instrumental in finding some of the child-friendly phrasing that I use here and transformed school nights at my house. Thanks also to Tara Fenimore for her thoughtful suggestions on working with young kids. Thank you to the AT Den teaching faculty, Heidi Leithwood, Mede Dupre, and Neda Diachenko for your wisdom and guidance. Thank you to Jane Apostle, classmate and friend, for your feedback and curiosity. Thank you to my mother, Judy Albertine, for lending her 30 years of children's reading expertise. And thank you to Ethan, the real-life Jack. This book is dedicated to my teacher, Neda Diachenko, who loaned me her set of AT books for kids and passed away before I could give them back. So that ending little dedication page gives a little bit more information on the context of this book and resources that I used. Let's talk about it a little bit. How did I start doing these wavy stick figures? I've always been interested in figure studies and in reducing what I see in people watching, down to what are their lines? What lines are they creating? When I was in my teacher training school, we happened to be across the street from a Starbucks. And so there were a couple times that we would just all go together and take a field trip off to Starbucks across the street, and we would just watch people and observe. It was people watching practice. And I would take a little notebook with me and actually sketch out figures like this to show what are the shapes that people are creating. And it really helps to kind of form our Alexander X-ray vision on where are they pulling and what's different about a neutral back versus whatever they're doing. So that's where these little stick figures started. And I deliberately used something very, very simple so that no one would get caught up in looking at particular, body shapes or clothes. I really wanted them to see kind of a skeletal structure underneath that still had to be fairly anatomically correct. And that took a lot of tries and a lot of practice to make sure that where, the neck curves backward to go into the head, it needs to hit at exactly the right point. Otherwise it looks weird. I put in these dashed yellow lines here so that it looks like a road, and so that little kids can kind of follow with their fingers what's going on. So at the time I was married and I had a stepson, Ethan, who was in 2nd grade. And this was at the very start of COVID, and it was so easy to find, books and everything when he was doing remote schooling. It was so easy to find books on his dad's job, because his dad's an engineer. And there were no books on my job, so I decided to write one. So that's why this is really about what do Alexander Technique teachers do. It's not trying to explain and teach the Alexander Technique itself to little kids. This is about the profession. And this is all very real stuff. These are the 2 setups. This was at the dining room table when he had his laptop, and this was at his desk working on homework. So he had a stool. The stool was too tall, and he couldn't really reach the floor very well. And he would end up so tight and pulled in, and he would pull his paper partially off the desk in front of him because of how hard he was pulling with his arms. And so I asked him if he would like to work with this. He knew what I was in school for. I had explained some of this stuff about, I'm in school working on helping people work with how they move and how they think. He actually did go into the training course a few times, and we had such a ball working with him and getting to actually practice working with a little kid. It was wonderful. So we'd take our little stool. This is the classic IKEA stool. You'll see these all over the place. And this is an IKEA, both IKEA stools, the footstool and the actual seat are both IKEA. The real stool seat is black. It's not blue, but black didn't really show up well against the pictures. So I noticed that when I would get him to have supported feet, he still wouldn't quite get the rest of his support underneath himself. So that's when I started to use hands-on work. And I'd put a hand on his back and direct up. And just that connection and direct up, he would just spring right back up again. And it's really amazing watching little kids do that, because they really do have this support system kind of built in so that they really want to be here. I mentioned someone in the dedications page, Tara Fenimore. I think she has since finished her doctorate, so she might be Dr. Tara Fenimore at this point. She was working with Columbia in New York and getting her doctorate in education as well as Alexander Technique. And she was studying, I think she was already a certified Alexander Technique teacher and then was also getting her doctorate in education about using Alexander Technique as a framework for working with little kids. So her doctoral research was on when does forward head posture, which is basically that, when does that start in little kids? And how can we find a way to start working with that and help them to not do that? So the short answer that she found was that it's taught in preschool, that 3-year-olds don't really do it. 3-year-olds move like this. They bend like this. They bend from the hip joints. And 5-year-olds start moving like this. I don't really want to go super into her research because that's for her to present in a way that would, come best from her, but I would definitely look her up if you're interested in this stuff. So certainly leave a comment if you want to know more about that, and I can see if I can get you in touch with her research. It's really wonderful. So I worked with hands-on with him. Now, floaty balloon head, melty ice cream shoulders is a slight adaptation of Sue Mary's work with the developing self and working with little kids in England. That's where this originally comes from. They had said melty custard, and I think a lot of American kids don't know what custard is. So I went with ice cream and stuck with that, and that tends to work pretty well. What I found was that if I just went only to, you have a floaty balloon head, the shoulders would start to come up as well because they're, smiling and laughing and thinking of, oh, I'm floating upward into the air, and the shoulders would start to rise. So I had to combine floaty balloon head with melty ice cream shoulders. But then I found that Ethan was still really stiff at his back and his belly. So then I added, this is my addition to it, soft back, soft belly. And that's what worked for Ethan. And it really did change immediately how he looked. He took a breath. It was a pretty magical change to watch happen the first couple times that I worked with him on these directions. Sorry, the back of this is sticking to the table. We did lie downs. This is a variation on table work. When you don't have a table in the room, you can use a floor. With little kids, I find that you actually don't really need to put something under their heads because their heads are so big. But I wanted to put that there just so that you could see kind of the context for the alignment of his spine. So this is the first time where you can really notice that the alignment of, in this case, Jack's spine is just about the same as the teacher's. And this is the first time that's happened. What I found was that when Ethan was starting to get really frustrated, when he didn't want to do homework anymore, I would sit next to him during homework time because that helped him to kind of stay on task, and then he could also ask me questions. And so I would just have a book, a printed book, not on a screen. That was important because he would get very distracted by the presence of a screen. I would have a printed book that I'm reading at the same table that he's doing his actual writing homework, 2nd grade. And he would then look over at me when he really needed a break, and he would say, can we just lie on the floor? I'd say, yeah, buddy, let's go lie on the floor. So then I would help him do this, and he's a very facially expressive child, and so he would look at me and go, oh, it's so much better. And so then he ended up like this, where he had supported feet. He was bending from his hip joints, and then he had his soft, easy spine above that. I helped him to sit a little bit closer to the table than sitting so far back here. So I moved the stool a bit closer, and that helped him to not have the paper falling off the table in front of him. We also worked a little bit with being able to tilt forward from the hip joints from here to be able to look down, but I found that he really didn't need to do very much. Little kids tend to have fairly short torsos, so they don't need nearly as much tilt as adults really tend to. And he liked it. He loved it a lot, and it really helped homework to not be such a battle every single night. It was a wonderful addition to getting him through those early elementary school years. I added 2 pages at the end here that are mainly for adults, assuming that this will be an adult reading to kids. So here's a way to think about Alexander Directions, and then just a little bit of information for grown-ups on here's how you can start to work with this stuff, here's how you find these things, and a little more mature language about that, working with chronic pain, fatigue, and improving performance. So I hope this was an interesting little deviation from our normal content for you. I show my university students this quite frequently, especially if I'm working with a grad student who is also teaching little kids. That would be teaching them music, right? Teaching an instrument. And so I show them this so that they have kind of a framework for here's how you can talk to little kids about this stuff. You can't say that you are teaching them Alexander Technique unless you are a certified Alexander Technique teacher. So that's kind of the boundary here. You can certainly say, I'm learning some Alexander Technique, and here's something I found helpful. I recommend you try this. Try thinking about floaty balloon head, melty ice cream shoulders, soft back, soft belly. You just can't say that you are teaching Alexander Technique unless you've actually gone through a full, training course program. So I hope you enjoy the book. Thanks for listening.